Continuing the lobster Twitter trend, because this is the fun way to look at the eldritch void that's taken up residency in a certain someone's head. He's given us a lot to pick from this time. There's a shift in attached images from clowns to just the Joker, particularly the Joaquin Phoenix version for all sorts of topics. There's his increasing use of this weird poetry-esque format, although calling it that is doing a disservice to all the poetry elementary students have written. Or his daughter, the slab of beef that didn't fall too far from the cow, Michaela, pushing back against his joke about women needing to stay in society to keep decorative pillow manufacturers afloat. There's even his Captain Carnage-like punish me attempt in trying to provoke people to engage with his tweets, daring people to call this cisgender man cis to his face. But no, the winner for this cycle, hands down, are the pair of response tweets to the news of the billionaire brawl, asking Gel on Crust if the match would be clothed or not, and helpfully suggesting oil be involved.
Smiley face.
This video made possible thanks to the continuing support of viewers, patrons, and PayPal pals like you. Thanks! And to do the credits at the beginning, we're going to take advantage of whatever this is. She doesn't like when I talk, so she was fully just cuddling until I start talking. A little bit of a different audio setup today, because my throat's still not 100% after the manometry last week, so the volume isn't there. Hopefully this works. Maybe it'll sound better and you guys will be like, oh, you have to change. You should always do your audio like that. Random microphone. That's why that's there. Anyways, thank you for your viewing support at the very least, if not extra support like subscribing, Patreon. The first little thank you cards went out yesterday, so those should be arriving hopefully by the time the video comes out for the people in the US, and hopefully soon after for the people overseas. That is for the $20 and up tiers. You get a nice little thank you card for me every month. And maybe stickers, haikus, limericks, just make your requests and I'll try to abide. Hi, and welcome back to this cognitive psychologist that's honestly a bit bummed that partial service to humanity match isn't going to happen. My mom said I can't. Total Sigma Chad move there. We, however, are tough enough to gain admittance to the salty spittoon because we are buckling down to finish Rule 4. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated, despite all the psychic damage we're going to accrue in this process. Since we are wrapping up this chapter, let's review what's been covered so far. This chapter started out with advice on how to become, quote, invaluable in the workplace, with it basically amounting to going above and beyond in the hopes you'll be rewarded for it, with a reference that spawned more questions than it answered. The next section, responsibility and meaning, started with him misunderstanding splaining Buddhism for the reader, which led to a whole discussion on sin, culminating in the boy who wants to off himself apparently, Peter Pan, and his biblical counterpart, Abraham. While this was somewhat familiar ground from 12 Rules, he kicked into overdrive with the next section, rescue your father, Osiris and Horus. Yep, a near one-to-one retread of his inclusion of Egyptian myths from the previous book. Fun. Following that is the question section, and who might that be? For who we should become in order to save our archetypal daddies. Who that is the temporal community of yous, plus, other people. This was also where we got the laughably dumb idea of zebras needing to species-side the lazy lions. The next step, naturally, was the section Happiness and Responsibility, which manages to get a Nine Inch Nails song lodged into my head every time I see it. We didn't get terribly far into this section because his reference for why happiness isn't what you should be pursuing needed a thorough breaking down. I'll be shutting down the survey related to that experiment this coming weekend from when this video is released, so if you're wanting to do it, clock's ticking. Brief channel news. I finally caved to the pretty persistent prompts from YouTube, so my Peterson playlist as well as the Irreversible Damage are now consumable through the YouTube Music app as podcasts. You'll never catch me in shorts though. What you can catch me in are pedantic pants, which can be yours through my merch store. While there, you can browse the collections of Chaos Dragon, Pedantry, or Citation Needed swag, the latter of which are now available in a thicker champion tie-dye. Also, as a reminder from the book tour video, the unpopular items like the notebooks, beanies, koozies, things like that are going to get culled, so if you've been holding off getting those things and you want one, that's probably enough preamble for the final leg of this chapter, so let's quickly refresh the visual cues they use to indicate where ideas are coming from. This means I'm paraphrasing the book, this means I'm responding to the book, or integrating my thoughts with science. And also talking about the final third of Peterson's references for this chapter. All 2 of them. It'd be funny if it wasn't so sad. And that could be my review for this book. As a reminder, we left off after going through reference 4. That reference found some effects for a couple. Max! It's that time of night, there's just going to be cat noise in the background. That reference found some effects for a couple personality traits on how impulsive someone is with regard to waiting for a larger amount of money versus taking a smaller amount now. It did not find anything supporting Peterson's claim here, that people get impulsive when feeling good vibes. There was one other thing I wanted to mention for this reference that slipped my mind entirely because I got so into the detailed trees of the paper. It was a bit of a struggle to actually find this paper, and that's only partially my fault. Basically, when pulling a reference, I enter in the authors, the year, and part of the title. Doing that for this paper yielded no results. My next major step was to go to the journal website itself, because for some reason that's easier for me to do than typing out the full reference. Peterson's citation has it in volume 42, published in 2018. The thing is, by 2018, this journal is up into the 70s for volumes. The paper can be found in the 40s, which puts it as being published in 2008. Homeboy had a typo for one of his own papers. After the annoyance, I get a fair bit of amusement from this. Hi. Anyways, that was as far as we got into this section, so there's not a lot to refresh here. Just that he doesn't want people pursuing happiness because it's a right now thing.
But now is by no means everything, and unfortunately, everything must be considered, at least insofar as you are able. In consequence, it is unlikely that whatever optimizes your life across time is happiness.
I mostly agree with this snippet. I could do without the mini callback to you not being able to think all too well, but otherwise, yeah. Happiness can be fleeting, and trying to build your life centered on pursuing happiness is probably going to lead to disappointment. But Peterson doesn't want us to think he's a stick in the mud.
I am not denying its desirability, by the way. If happiness comes to you, welcome it with gratitude and open arms, but be careful, because it does make you impetuous.
Can't just let people be happy. Always gotta come in with a
negative nudge
shit.
What might serve as a more sophisticated alternative to happiness? Imagine it is living in accordance with the sense of responsibility, because that sets things right in the future. Imagine, as well, that you must act reliably, honestly, nobly, and in relationship to a higher good in order to manifest the sense of responsibility properly. The higher good would be the simultaneous optimization of your function and the function of the people around you across time, as we have discussed previously.
And then some stuff about consciously setting your aim towards that we've seen loads of times before. Put your imagination hats on, because he's going to have us doing it a fair bit for the remainder of this chapter. It's such a weird rhetorical device. He clearly thinks his advice is the way to live your life, so why frame it in this hypothetical way? An alternative I've heard is to pursue contentment instead of happiness. I took a peek at the literature here, and it seems to be a bit of a can of worms, with a fair bit of discussion just trying to nail down the definitions of the two concepts, so we're just gonna close the door on that and speak as people. The idea here is similar to Peterson's justification. Happiness can be fleeting and hard to maintain. Contentment, where you try to be okay with where things are in your life, even if you aren't overjoyed about them, is more realistic to try to maintain and keep present in your life. So try to prioritize the things that will help maintain contentment in your life and have happiness come in when it can, as the nice icing and sprinkles on a pretty alright cake. Peterson may not regard this as sophisticated as his pursuance of responsibility, but I think focusing on contentment is far more sustainable. You aren't having to shackle yourself with burdens in a never-ending chase of some unattainable ideal goal that's is an idea Peterson's building to right now. You're just doing what you can to find some peace. Getting back to the advice, not only do we need to live our lives in accordance with responsibility, we have to manifest it properly, implying it's possible to do this improperly, like there's some lawful evil way of doing it or something. Although having had that thought right now, it would actually be a pretty good descriptor for Peterson's operating morality. This higher good definition is a trip. He says we've talked about the optimization of your function and the function of the people around you before, but optimizing function? I feel like I'd remember something as weird as that. What function is he even talking about? Is it a kind of circular definition where we're optimizing our ability to work towards the higher good? Why do we need to be optimizing other people's function too? How is this going to help build meaning? He says a question arises. It's actually a series of questions, so we'll take them in turn. Question 1, quote, what is the consequence of that psychologically? With that implied as a step from the previous quote about explicitly setting your aim at reliably, honestly, and nobly optimizing your function, as well as those around you, whatever that all actually means. And yet another abandoned list. Yes, it bothers me that much. He says that firstly, positive emotions that come from attaining something are unreliable and short-lived. His examples are eating or graduating high school only to be thrown out into the adult world.
You are in the position of Sisyphus. You strove and struggled to push your boulder to the pinnacle, and you find yourself instead at the foot of the mountain.
The more philosophically minded of you may have an inkling of where I'm going to go next with this, and hopefully this philosophy noob will do it justice. Let's call it life philosophy, alternative to that of Peterson's doom and gloom that's been suggested in my comment section and on my Discord, is that of Albert Camus.
But it'd be fine in English to say it as Albert Camus. Albert Camus from French, Albert Camus.
He said it's okay. The French philosopher and writer was foundational for the rise of absurdism, which can be boiled down to life and existence themselves being absurd. There isn't a built-in higher purpose or meaning, and what you do with that existential crisis that can follow that revelation is up to you. You can embrace nihilism and fall into the very despair Peterson thinks is inevitable from this perspective. Or you can build your own meaning and purpose, rebelling against the absurdity of the situation we are all born into and will ultimately die of. Camus is the life advice antiparticle to Peterson. Peterson sees Sisyphus's struggle as a self-defeating perceptual suckfest. Camus, instead, concluded his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, in this way.
All Sisyphus's silent joy is contained therein. His fate belongs to him. His rock is his thing. There is no sun without shadow, and it is essential to know the night. The absurd man says yes, and his effort will henceforth be unceasing. If there is a personal fate, there is no higher destiny, or at least there is but one which he concludes is inevitable and despicable. For the rest, he knows himself to be the master of his days. I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe henceforth without a master seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.
But your boy, J. Peets, must not imagine Sisyphus happy. He seems to see it as an impossibility, as things like pleasure or attainment. And hang on, it's not like Sisyphus ever achieved attainment in the myth. He was said to be a tricksy one who ticked off enough gods he was condemned to rolling a boulder up a steep hill, only for it to roll back down to the bottom when he'd almost finished. He's boulder balled, rock blocked. For a man who built his career on what the traditional stories inform us on how we should live our lives, he manages to get critical details wrong at a startling rate. He seems to see it as an impossibility, as things like pleasure or attainment are unreliable sources of good vibes. Question 2, quote, what is a truly reliable source of positive emotion? His answer is found in the, quote, pursuit of a valuable goal. And Peterson is going to blow the rest of his reference load in this next part.
Imagine you have a goal. You aim at something. You develop a strategy in relationship to that aim, and then you implement it. And then, as you implement the strategy, you observe that it is working. That is what produces the most reliable positive emotion. Imagine over time that the attitudes and actions that manage this most effectively, in a competitive way that is very Darwinian, come, eventually, to dominate over all others. Imagine that is true psychologically and socially, simultaneously. Imagine that this occurs in our own life, but also across centuries, as everyone interacts and talks and raises a particular mode of being to primary status.
Reference 5 is to the first edition of a book on the neuropsychology of anxiety. I was able to get my hands on the second edition, which, interestingly enough, is something Peterson had referenced in 12 Rules for the Precise Speech chapter. Last time, this book was called in to support his claim that when chaos ensues, we can't easily perceive the world, and so, quote, our bodies ready themselves for all possible eventualities, then describes the fight or flight stuff. As this is a book on anxiety, Pearson's use of it there makes sense, just from the title alone. Here, though, looking back at that script, I hadn't gotten a copy of that book yet, so I didn't catch that the authors lay out a, as they call it, heretical theory for how anxiety works in the brain, which they note in the foreword isn't totally supported by more current research, but who let that ever stop a good theory? Also, the book is over 400 pages long, so we are not going to get caught in those weeds, and we're going to focus in on what Peterson brought it in to support. The thing about this book is, it spends a lot of time talking about animal models and brain lesions to build up their anxiety theory. Given the length and my inability to muster the fucks to read all of it, I will have to concede that it's possible there is something in here supportive of Peterson's claim. However, I've skimmed it, looking for something along the lines of what Peterson's talking about, and I'm just not seeing it. But I'm again falling into the weeds. Peterson's use of this book to support his claim that we're basically rewarded for implementing a successful problem-solving strategy is, quite frankly, lazy. He's familiar with these books, as evidenced by him including the 2 editions in his last 2 books, and without providing a fucking page number for where the first edition supports his claim, it kind of seems like he's like, oh yeah, these books, they're doorstoppers. There's bound to be something in there that supports what I'm saying. Lazy. Reference 6 is a review paper that nails down the difference between reward and reinforcement, specifically in neural animal models. We're talking about rats self-stimulating with surgically insert electrodes in their brains, micro-injections of morphine or amphetamine, and lesions, types of animal models. There is nothing to do with iterating problem-solving strategies or how some, quote, attitudes or actions that manage those strategies most effectively are being competitively selected for in this paper. Nothing. So I guess it's a damn good thing he's got us imagining all of this, because at least from the empirical support he's bringing to the table, that's what it is. Imaginary. With all the imagining we're having to do in this chapter, it's almost like he's trying to manifest all of this into being. If he can get enough people to believe it, these things will be true psychologically and socially, and that he can give rise to a new society that is just the safe traditional one, with the ever so humble top creative conservative as top lobster. But of course, this manifested imaginary society raises a particular mode of being to primary status. He tweets relentlessly about the liberals or the socialists or whatever the fuck he's calling it that day in their Orwellian policies about everything. But this manifested Bernt way of life seems like it would be very 1984-ish. A thing still bugging me about the vagueness surrounding all of this advice is that he leaves out key pieces of info. What is a proper manifestation of responsibility? What exactly does it mean to optimize your function? Which mode of being would be socially selected to primary status? Because I feel like in his mind, there's a correct answer. And since I'm privy to what's coming up, no, I am in fact not jumping the gun here. These details never manifest themselves into being. Getting into specifics before moving on. This might just be me and my anxiety, but I generally feel the most positive emotion when I've accomplished a goal. Until then, there's just a tension about whether or not I'll be able to finish it. When will I be able to get this done? Is it going to be any good? Will people like it? on and on. Yeah, there can be moments while I'm working towards that goal where I'm pleased with how something turned out, or this made me feel so clever or smart. Like, there can be little dopamine hits there, but they are nothing compared to when it's done. But who knows? Maybe he would say that I'm not setting my aim high enough. As the way he will set this up, your goal should always be just a little bit out of reach. Over that mountain, over the horizon, just... The third question comes after a, quote, crucial implication. He says you can't be happy if you don't have responsibilities. There are no good vibes without a, quote, valuable and valued goal. Weird that he doesn't supply a reference here on such a bold and concrete claim. Although given his track record, it probably wouldn't add anything other than more work for me now. And I've tried to think back to test this claim. If I was happy in the absence of responsibilities. And the thing is, with the way the world is set up, I have to go pretty far back into my childhood to a time when I didn't have responsibilities. And if we add goals into the mix, it goes beyond the bounds of my memory. Kids have chores, which are a form of responsibility. They may be charged with taking care of pets, which is definitely requiring them to be responsible. And they also have their own goals and ambitions, even if it is to dig themselves a backyard pool, which my parents did not really find a valuable goal. Way to have something to twist your ankle on? Yeah. Muddy pool? Not so much. And a question arises here. What about hobbies? Part of the appeal for a lot of hobbies is the complete lack of responsibility. Your job might not, probably, can't fulfill many emotional needs for you, or contentment, or happiness. But if you fucking love your, Legos, and they spark joy, where's the responsibility in that? Where is the value and value goal? I suppose the way this argument could be forced into kinda squaring it would be by saying the responsibilities are being met elsewhere, like through the job, but that feels like a kludge. This will become more clear with the next quote, but do remember that this author is a judgy one. He is more than willing to put your life goals or ambitions or whatever into the good or bad boxes, just like he did with the guy wanting the margarita retirement in 12 Rules. It seems like his responsibility or meaning framework is set up so that you couldn't possibly experience positive emotions on goals he considers invaluable. You're just lying to yourself if you think you are. So if you can't be happy or experience other positive emotions without responsibilities and goals, question 3 is, quote, what exactly constitutes a valid goal? Long-time dear viewers may be feeling some hesitation about how this definition is going to go. I certainly am. Will be a more coherent answer that still manages to disappoint by its aggressive conservatism? Will it maybe be the style-mad ramblings of someone who found an eldritch monster while staring into the Jungian abyss? Or will it be a nothing burger? Something that looks like it should have substance, but just doesn't?
Imagine that you are pursuing something pleasurable, that's short-term and trivial. The wise part of you will be comparing that pursuit to the possible goal of acting in the best interest of your community, of future selves, and your community of other people. Perhaps you are unwilling to allow yourself to realize that wisdom. You do not wish to bear the responsibility, not in a place of an immediate, impulsive focus on pleasure.
We have such sights to show you.
Just as a heads up, there's going to be some speed ramping for a little bit, just a little. To get the full experience, you're going to need it in context, but Dr. P is nothing if not verbose.
You are fooling yourself, however, especially at the deeper levels of your being. If you believe such avoidance will prove successful, the wise and ancient parts of you, seriously concerned with your survival, are neither easy to deceive nor to set aside. But you take aim at a trivial goal anyway, and develop a rather shallow strategy to attain it, only to find it is not satisfying because you do not care enough. It does not matter to you, not deeply. Furthermore, the fact that you are not pursuing the goal you should rightly be pursuing means that you are feeling guilty, ashamed, and lesser at the same time.
Yep, it was a nothing burger with a nice tall glass of judgy Peterson, topped with a cherry of his all-knowing mind-reading ability. Let people relax in leisure, for fuck's sake. They need downtime to be kind of okay. Rise and grind all day. Every day makes for some very dull jacks. Some activities, some goals even, are just pleasure for pleasure's sake, and that's fine. It does make me wonder about Peterson's sex life, though. From these last two quotes, it seems like the options are feeling guilty, ashamed, and lesser at debasing himself for pleasure, or doing some mental gymnastics for how it's a socially productive act.
Well, I mean, we've got 2 children, and we've had sexual intercourse twice.
Potshots aside, I have concerns about the framing and mental narrative he's giving readers about their invalid goals. I can see some parallels with the anti-abortion rhetoric that's worked its way into the American consciousness. That people who get abortions are always going to be forever tainted and psychologically damaged by what they did. That they'll always regret having an abortion, or they're going to be left wondering for the rest of their lives what that aborted cluster of cells could have grown into, and so on. But the thing is, for a lot of people, these thoughts wouldn't have entered their minds if it weren't for the insistence that they would do so. So now they're left carrying these terrible feelings that they wouldn't have to have if it weren't for some underhanded manipulation by the anti-abortion fucks. Similarly, I worry that sincere Beyond Order readers are now going to have these implanted thoughts creeping in when they aren't pursuing goals Peterson has deemed valid. That they won't really get to relax and do things they previously enjoyed because a Kermit-like voice is going to be lingering in the background, insisting they're feeling guilty and ashamed. I mean, I saw something similar happen in real time at his book tour stop down the road in San Francisco. He was going on about his stupid fucking suits and how expensive they are, and emphasized it's always important to dress well. I was up in the tippy top of the balcony, so I had a pretty good view of this. When he said that, I could see the more casually dressed members of the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats, or even just drop their gaze or look somewhere else, as if he were directly calling them out for not heeding his sartorial call. His opinion is important to his fans, so I worry about some of the harm that could come from advice like this. Which brings us to a critical problem. What exactly constitutes a trivial goal, and by extension, a Peterson-approved goal? The closest we get to anything meaningful for valid goals are to, quote, act properly in relationship to the long term for everyone, which is still relying on properly being a useful modifier, which it just isn't. And from this, we just know that trivial goals are the ones our conscience objects to and shames us for. While thinking through this, it seems to me like he assumes that everybody thinks and feels like he does, deep down. It's just that the less conservative or job-focused people are living a lie and they are suffering for it. But if you stop reading this book as outright life advice and more of an autobiography, things make more sense. As a reminder, when he was coming back into the spotlight after his medical adventure, he said that he considered himself someone who needed to follow his advice too.
In my lectures and my writings, I've never suggested that I was anything other than one of the people who also needed to learn these lessons. So I included myself in the population of people who needed some moral improvement.
So he isn't satisfied unless they are big important problems for his galaxy brain to solve. He feels guilty and ashamed if his goal isn't of sufficient scale. But that isn't in the framing of Beyond Order or 12 Rules. It's barely even in the Petersonian canon. I would definitely have a very different reaction to this book if he could write it more as sort of reflections of things that have worked for him or helped him, or some other way of getting that information out instead of it seeming like this modern day commandments from on high. But alas, that would be asking the lobster to change its spots.
This is not a helpful strategy. It is not going to work. I have never met anyone who is satisfied when they knew they were not doing everything they should be doing.
And therefore, those sorts of people don't exist, because Peterson sees all, knows all, and can see deep down into our deepest, darkest cores. Personally, there is a magical, experiential state of being that comes from playing hooky with your responsibilities. Yeah, there's some shit that needs to be done, but that is going to wait while I put some more time into this game, hobby, just anything that isn't the thing I'm supposed to be doing. It's like a more broad procrastinating. In my house spouse days, playing games all day, after a certain point, lost some of the appeal, in part because it was the thing I was doing. I wasn't playing games in between work sessions, I wasn't not responding to some emails, or just things I had to do. It was the thing I was doing. Going to the polar opposite isn't the answer, though. As I said earlier, I believe that all work and no play makes us not good. It's bad for us. Yeah, there are the rare people who will find just total joy and bliss in their job, but we're not talking about those people. And seeing as how Peterson is offloading some of his research and writing tasks onto whatever AI he's using that month, I don't think it's him either. While we aren't getting hit with the style madness at this end of this section, we are getting an extra heaping of doom and negativity.
We know that we are continually and inescapably playing an iterated game from which we cannot easily hide. No matter how much we wish to discount the future completely, it is part of the price we paid for being acutely self-conscious and able to conceptualize ourselves across the entire span of our lives. We are stuck with it. There is no escaping from the future. And when you are stuck with something and there is no escaping from it, the right attitude is to turn around voluntarily and confront it. That works. And so, instead of your short-term impulsive goal, you lay out a much larger scale goal, which is to act properly in relationship to the long term for everyone.
I don't know about you all, but I'm getting kind of tired of hearing about games and game players and all of that noise. To find a positive, yes, I agree we shouldn't hide from what's coming down the temporal road. And if you can live your life in a way where you can make it a habit to stay on top of things or do things that will help you in the future, great. But it's also important to give yourself forgiveness if a mistake happens or the habits slip. No one is perfect. Why does he think we want to, quote, discount the future completely? Why does he make any of the assumptions he does in this chapter, really? The future seems to be a sort of Damocles for Peterson, and the thread cutting will happen if you dare to have a moment of fun, just to punish you for your impudence. Or another metaphor that works, because he loves himself some metaphors and stories, is a trapped or cornered animal. He says the right attitude is to voluntarily confront it, but is this really voluntary? If we're stuck with it and we can't escape it, it sounds like a trap. To me, the future is just kind of there. It might suck, it might be okay, but until then, it's just kind of a neutral thing. I don't work towards my goals or undertake my responsibilities because doom awaits me if I don't. I do them because I guess it just kind of gives me meaning and purpose to be doing those things. There's no need to smother everything in dread sauce. Peterson's re-wordsing his words again, albeit in a way consistent with himself earlier in the book.
There is a proper way to behave, an ethic, and you are destined to contend with it. You cannot help but calculate yourself across time, and everyone else across time, and you are reporting back to yourself, inevitably, on your own behavior and misbehavior. What works across multiple time frames and multiple places for multiple people, including yourself, that is the goal. It is an emergent ethic, hard to formulate explicitly, but inescapable in its existence and its consequences, and an incredibly deep part of the game of being.
This emphasis on an emergent ethic wasn't in 12 Rules, so hey, something kinda new, I guess. The closest he came in 12 Rules was the, quote, culminating ethic of the canon of the West, amusingly found in that book's Rule 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. As you can see in context, it serves a pretty similar purpose though. Don't be a totalitarian against yourself, but try to do better. Quote, set your sights on the betterment of being, align towards the highest good, yada yada. This personal ethic first appeared in Beyond Orders Rule 1, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievement. So the personal ethic was coming from universally understood solutions to problems that must work for everyone. Oh, hi there. Psychological and social simultaneously constraint. Forgot you had appeared before too. Anyways, this was later evolved into a, quote, meta-ethic of the best game strategies for people to employ. His usage here seems to be in line with that, albeit with a slightly different label as his drop the meta. And similar to its previous usage, we now, of course, have to talk about games and players of those games in the weirdest fucking way possible.
Great players are attractive. Attractive people attract mates. The closer we match the pattern, the emergent pattern, the more likely we are to survive and protect our families. The playing field selects the players on the basis of their ethical behaviors. We are therefore biologically prepared to respond positively to and to imitate the great player, and to disapprove, even violently, of the deceiver, the cheat, and the fraud. And it is your conscience, your instinct for moral virtue, that indicates deviation from the path. If you do not follow the right path, you will wander off a cliff and suffer miserably. And there is simply no way that the most profound parts of yourself are going to allow that without protest.
Of course, there's the omnipresent doom here, with us wandering off a cliff if we're not on the straight and narrow, but regarding the whole quote, what? There's so much here that non sequiturs, the logical path between arguments, would look like a web spun by a spider on mind-altering drugs. Good gamers are attractive. Hotties get mates. But then he swerves that therefore gamers get mates and goes to gamers have higher survival and better familial protection. Skipped a couple steps there. Same for the shift from the playing field, selecting gamers based on good behavior, to other players violently smashing down the unethical players, to the conscience-dictated path. I feel like I can't possibly be making sense trying to summarize this. How the hell did he write this and think, yeah, that flows well? Don't answer that. All of this is a bit funny now, with how much Peterson's been cozying up to the super walker of the ethical path and payer of data storage bills, Elon Musk. An implicit assumption here is that the playing field is an ethical and fair one, which, as demonstrated by the aforementioned melon husk, it just isn't. There are loads of players who are gaming the system unethically who are extrinsically rewarded for it. Maybe their consciences are screaming out at them, but the quote, biologically prepared disapproval of these people doesn't do anything in changing things. The best we can hope for at this point is more maverick ocean and space exploration or billionaire cage matches. The last thing I want to point out here is this quote, right path. He says we'll know we're off the path because the most profound parts of ourselves will let us know. Going back to what I said earlier, if his assumption of everyone thinking and feeling like him were correct, further explanation wouldn't be needed here. People would be able to read between the lines and get the full advice nugget. There's just an itsy whale problem of this not being true. And this is super topical for one of his recent Twitter obsessions. Trans-affirming care. A transgender non-binary person's right path may involve them seeking out some form of transition, from social to bureaucratic to medical. Their most profound parts of themselves are pleading with them to do this, to be able to feel some measure of comfort with themselves. Healthcare providers who haven't been infected with brainworms are working to provide that medical care. Their right path is to minimize harm and give the medically appropriate treatment. And then you've got ideologues like Peterson coming in, supporting the rallying cry that these providers are, quote, butchers who deserve prison, at best. Supportive parents are labeled narcissistic enablers. The affected youths are said to be victims who will regret what will be done to them. The irreversible damage. I and other like-minded individuals would say Peterson is throwing himself off that moral cliff, while he clearly thinks he's in the right. All of us in this scenario believe we're doing the right thing, with the support of our consciences. But this absolute conflict between people can even happen isn't mentioned anywhere in this book, just that there's the right path and doom, and the implication that our lobstery Lord and Savior Peterson is walking the right path. And there's another paragraph basically repeating that, with the most profound parts of your psyche objecting to you YOLOing yourself off that immoral cliff. And then he works in the rule title.
If the cost of betraying yourself in the deepest sense is guilt, shame, and anxiety, the benefit of not betraying yourself is meaning, the meaning that sustains. That is the most valuable of opportunities that lurks where responsibility has been abdicated.
Pity it doesn't make sense. This might all just be too big brain for little me, but I don't see how following your conscience is fighting an opportunity from abandoned responsibility. If you're following your ethic, you haven't abandoned responsibility. So, the way he lays this out as working is that your conscience will inform you of your transgressions, and by elimination, you can figure out the right way to act, because wrong is easier to figure out. But of course, there's another doom spiral of him saying you will fight trying to do any of this because it's painful and allowing a part of yourself to die. You may have noticed a trend here. The positive thing we're supposed to be doing or striving for is defined by what it isn't. The valid goal is the one you don't feel guilty or ashamed pursuing. The right path is the one your conscience is quiet about. Meaning can be found when you aren't betraying yourself. The way to act is found by paying attention to how not to act. Not entirely sure what to do with this observation, so make of that what you will. And this brings us into my next observation. This sets us up with his favorite 2 boxes, this time for morality. There's the right way to act, and there's the wrong way to act, and there is no space for anything in between that. But nuanced morality is more difficult to deal with, and more difficult to sell as life advice, so here we are. He flips from the doom spiral into big promises of how taking on your adversarial conscience as a partner will lead to your moral ascension on the, quote, straight and narrow path. He has a pretty dismal view of people, doesn't he? That it's such a monumental struggle for all of us to just not be shitty people. Given all of his past writing, of course he sees the right way to act as a straight and narrow path. Anything off this path will lead the reader to falling to the dreaded postmodernism with our science and genders. Scary. He continues on with the promises of what this will do for your life. You are going to focus on aiming at the highest good, whatever that actually is, and that is going to free you from nihilism and despair, and also protect you from the cynical criticism of others.
There is a high goal, a mountain peak, a star that shines in the darkness, beckoning above the horizon. Its mere existence gives you hope, and that is meaning without which you cannot live.
It seems like at some point you attain your goals, at least if you set some realistic ones, and it's not clear what you're supposed to do at that point. It's almost funny that he brought up Sisyphus, as it seems like he's setting up this highest good as something that you're always working towards, but are never actually going to attain. Cynically, this seems like a way to set up a customer base that can't outgrow you or the life advice you're selling. That they're always going to need you to just dangle that carrot out for them. I know his advice books have helped some people out of dark times, and I would absolutely rather people fall into Peterson than somebody like Andrew Tate or otherwise read or worse pilling themselves. But I have to wonder, with how vague this all is, it seems like Peterson isn't actually giving them much directly. It's more just an empty framework for them to build on in any meaningful way. Which would be fine if his fan base didn't seem to not think that they were the ones doing the heavy lifting and filling out what all of this means and helping themselves, but from what I've seen, they tend to give the credit to Peterson. If you set aside all the doom and negativity, there isn't much more here than the general believe in yourself stuff you'd find in something like a Disney movie. Speaking of, Peterson pivots to talking about Pinocchio. Like, the transition is just, remember Pinocchio? And it's obviously the Disney version because in his telling of it, Jiminy Cricket gets a gold star instead of being killed. His focus is on Geppetto, wishing on a higher star for his real boy. And the story is a Jungian psychological drama, as we all need to
lift your eyes above the horizon to establish a transcendent goal. If you wish to cease being a puppet, under the control of things you do not understand and perhaps do not wish to understand, then all the subsystems or subpersonalities that might otherwise be pursuing their own limited fulfillment will join together under the aegis of a truly ideal, and the consequences of that will be an engagement that approximates the ultimate or total. Under such conditions, all the parts of you are going to be on board. That is the psychological equivalent of monotheism. That is the emergence of the higher self that might be the true servant of God, in whatever metaphysical reality potentially underlies what is obvious to our blind and limited mortal selves.
What? There's just so much style madness here. It's like he's been holding it in for a bit and just released it all over that last paragraph. You need to do this lofty goal setting to cut the strings of those incomprehensible things controlling you. Now free, you can Jungishly integrate your unconscious archetypes and become a powerful, individuated person. This will level up your psyche, like religions advancing along the tech tree to monotheism. This will let you truly be a servant of God, which there obviously is in at least some fashion. We're just too blind and mortal to fully perceive it. Him. Them? Time to chuck some bits and bobs from 12 Rules, along with some stuff from this book, into a blender and make a vague-ass smoothie. Gross. I'm gonna condense down the wordy kaleness of his call and response prose though. going to try to make this smoothie as quick and easy to swallow as I can. The, quote, highest possible goal, still evading specificity, is the, quote, antidote to suffering and harshness of life. You need to adopt responsibilities, both your own and others, in order to be able to pursue that goal. And no whining here either, about not wanting to shoulder the burden of being, to borrow his phrasing from the first book. You need that burden, bucko, to counter your multitude of flaws that may wake you up in the night. This is how you can gain some real self-respect. It strikes me as kind of toxic to put this expectation on readers who've come to him for this advice, that you need to take on more than what is basically your fair share of responsibility and existential load in order to consider yourself just breaking even. On top of not really getting something useful out of this because of the vagary, he's robbed us of what could have been an interesting insight from clinical psychology. What is the difference between real self-respect and the shallow moment-to-moment construct? Assuming there is something to actually be said there and not just style-mad lobster fluff, which you really do not want in your smoothie. Then we come to a huge honking promise, which is relatively testable, at least as far as these sorts of claims go.
Your life becomes meaningful in precise proportion to the depths of the responsibility you are willing to shoulder.
Testable and a pretty concrete statement. Too bad we'd have to just take his word for it. Now, he doesn't say that's the only way to build or find meaning in your life, but I feel like it's there in the subtext, especially with what follows. He gives the example, yes, thank you Peterson for examples, of a guy laying bricks. On its own, bricklaying can be boring, but the task can be given meaning if he zooms out to the total project. Building a cathedral whose purpose is the glorification of the highest good. This means that every single brick is aiding the divine. Therefore, if you are lacking meaning in your life, you're not trying to build a cathedral. Duh.
Because if you were, then you would experience a sense of meaning in relationship to your sufficiently high goal, and it would justify the misery and limitations of your life. If you have something meaningful to pursue, then you are engrossed in life. You are on a meaningful path. The most profound and reliable instinct for meaning, if not perverted by self-deceit and sin, there is no other way to state it, manifests itself when you are on the path of maximum virtue.
So, if you're lacking meaning in your life, it's because you haven't tried to find a sufficiently big picture to the work you're doing? Or because your instinct for meaning is being prevented from manifesting itself because you tainted it by lying to yourself? Oh, thing is, some jobs are going to be more difficult to zoom out and find the meaning in, like retail jobs. You might have some positive interactions with customers, but unless you're SpongeBob, slinging burgers is just a means to a financial end. In those cases, a person may absolutely be finding meaning through their personal connections or their hobbies or any other number of things, if they're given the time to do so. But telling people that they just haven't looked at the situation from the right perspective yet is kind of fucked. A person getting yelled at all day by irate customers, having trouble finding meaning in their job as instructed to by Peterson earlier this chapter, that person having trouble finding meaning, it's not their fault. But there's also a bit of a circular definition or logical trap in play here. When you find the right perspective to look at things, you'll find meaning. But if you aren't getting that meaning hit, it's possibly because you've broken it. He's also brushing up against flow again here, with the engrossed in life phrase. If only I could get the Lobster Army to read that book instead. Broadly, I hate this negative framing he seemingly can't help himself but come back to. That meaning is the thing to, quote, justify the misery and limitations of your life. That your meaning instinct might be, quote, perverted by self-deceit and sin. It feels kind of like sending a loved one off on their day with, bye, have a good day at work or school or whatever, but never forget that you're a profoundly flawed and broken being who needs to justify their existence somehow. Love you! Somehow, there's even more rehashing of meaning being an indicator you're doing things right, so we're going to just move on, other than to note the inclusion of a, quote, nihilistic death metal punk who is able to have all of that negativity melt away at a concert with their favorite band and cause this hateful person to dance in spite of themselves.
It is those patterns of sound, layered one on top of another, harmoniously, moving in the same direction, predictably and unpredictably, in perfect balance, order, and chaos in their internal dance. And you dance with it, no matter how scornful you are. You align yourself with that patterned, directional harmony, and in that, you find the meaning that sustains.
Okay, so now you either need to listen to your conscience and follow the straight and narrow path to find meaning, or vibe with some really good music. If meaning is this easy to hack, maybe the definition's overly broad. There's a lot of lofty words about how we're instinctually oriented towards the highest good, but that people can suck and lead you away from the good. But if you're attentive, you can take that aggravation as an opportunity. You're annoyed because responsibility has been abdicated. That maybe it's your destiny to make it right, like the biblical late bloomer, Abraham. Oh, yes, this again. It's been exactly 20 pages since he introduced it earlier in the chapter. With regard to the summarized stuff, it's not immediately obvious to me how to square the current advice of fixing the situations that annoy you to find meaning with the previous books, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. It almost seems like it's putting the readers in a logical trap. Make it your responsibility to fix the world, but only do so when your shit is perfectly sorted, and because you're a fallible human, that is a high bar to reach. But you need to work on it so you have a chance of finding meaning in this life. I guess it can kind of fit together, since he included the Sisyphean stuff about always working towards the higher good. Doesn't mean I like it, particularly the framing. But let's get back to our purported heroic call to adventure.
What calls you out into the world, however, to your destiny, is not ease. It is struggle and strife. It is bitter contention and the deadly play of the opposites. It is probable, inevitable, that the adventure of your life will frustrate and disappoint and unsettle you as you heed the call of conscience and shoulder your responsibility and endeavor to set yourself in the world right. But that is where the deep meaning that orients you and shelters you is to be found.
Style-mad repetition of this idea, with copious amounts of semicolons and ands.
That is where the life that is worth living is to be eternally found, and where you can find it personally if only you are willing. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated.
Well, when you put it that way, how could anyone say no? I'm all for setting realistic expectations for things and not sugarcoating the bad parts, but as always, there's, I want to say nuance, but you don't even have to dig that deep. Life isn't entirely shitty. Even while working on hard stuff, it can be good or fun even. But he's always got to pull this from a negative place. Like, I can be pretty pessimistic about stuff. So when I'm saying, dial back the negativity, bro, I'd also disagree about this horrible place being where the stuff that makes life worth living being found. Again, not sugarcoating things. Some of your life's drive will probably have to be dug out of the metaphorical muck, but not all of it. Why set this expectation for readers, Peterson? Why reinforce this negatively biased framing? You shouldn't have to keep your gaze turned upwards at the distant and unattainable star that's somehow giving you hope, while semi-grudgingly loaded down with everyone's responsive, this is a Jesus thing again. The Christly life and all of that. Right, so what were we promised this chapter is going to be about from the Overture's description? Quote, the meaning that sustains people through difficult times is to be found not so much in happiness, which is fleeting, but in the voluntary adoption of mature responsibility for the self and others. I had to flip back through my scripts for this chapter because I didn't remember difficult times coming up as why we're needing to find meaning. It seems like the closest he came to talking about that is in the context of Abraham's call to adventure leading him to hardship, which was reframed as a way for him to find out how tough he really was. The bulk of the difficult times realistically was all the negative framing Peterson put on things. How stuck and burdened with yourself you are. How you'll wander off a cliff because you're ignoring your conscience. There also wasn't development of the mature responsibility idea. Yeah, he went on and on about the right path that will be the one your conscience doesn't object to, but it was a lot of words and punctuation signifying basically nothing. But hey, he did talk about meaning being more important than happiness. I'll give him that. It's been long enough since we started this rule, you may not remember the aside we had on the chapter art. Basically, the main figure seems to be the Greek titan Atlas, In the available context, it seems like the women are his daughters, the Hesperides, who guarded Hera's orchard. And now at the conclusion of this chapter, Atlas holding up the celestial spheres makes some sense. He's literally shouldering a burden, and maybe he's getting some meaning out of it. There's just the teensy-weensy little problem of Atlas not doing this willingly. This was his punishment for not siding with the insurgent gods, so this metaphor dropped the celestial ball big time. Plus, there's zero reason for his daughters, or whoever those women are, to be there. For all the importance Peterson places on the meanings of symbols, this seems like something that should have been corrected in the drafts. His use of references didn't fare much better. Reference 1. The book Why Men Earn More from 2005 seemed to be doing some damn lies with statistics in service of a juicier take, which Peterson seemed to uncritically buy. Reference 2 was used to support his claim that sins or errors of omission are more upsetting than errors of commission. The paper was a bit of a hot mess that seemed to overextend the results they had, albeit in a way that supported Peterson's claim, which brings him to 1 for 2. Reference 3, his maps of meaning, was nestled in the Egyptian myth discussion, which is such a non-reference at this point I didn't even mention it while summarizing things. Reference 4 was another work Peterson had a hand in creating, which was full of questionable statistics choices and conclusions. What's worse is it didn't even directly deal with the claim he was making. The paper had no positive emotion metric or manipulation. Sloppy. The final 2 references were housed in the same paragraph. Reference 5 was supposed to be supporting the idea that positive emotions come from successful problem solving, which, nope, not in that book. Reference 6 was called in to back up his claim that the attitudes and actions that manage problem-solving strategy use are selected in a Darwinian sense. Also a resounding nope. So all told, just one of his paltry 6 references for this chapter added meaningful support to the claims he was making. I said it before, and I'll say it again. It'd be funny if it wasn't so sad. Okay, let's bring this rule home. Or rather, take it to its new home. In a farm. Upstate. To paraphrase Csikszentmihalyi in Flo's chapter on meaning, in the absence of belief in a higher power, we have to figure out what's meaningful for ourselves and make that meaning happen. One way to do this, to borrow a phrase from a TV show like 2 decades old, is to find your bliss, which is just a pursuit that brings you contentment, if not happiness, and work on it. If this pursuit is at the sweet spot of difficult but not too difficult and very engaging, you may find yourself slipping into a flow state. When you're in a flow state, time just kind of seems to melt away and you feel pretty good working on the thing you're doing. Plus, there's the added benefit of improving your skill or even your life while you're doing this. If you don't currently have one of these things, consider this your invitation to find one. Perhaps there's a hobby just waiting to be found, or you could explore what other job opportunities you could swing. But don't feel like this has to be done to optimize your function or become invaluable at work or save your archetypal father. You certainly can do those things if it helps you find meaning, but don't be afraid to branch out either. Also, don't feel like you have to follow any of the life scripts given to you as the right path. And on this next part, I may have fallen into agreeing with Peterson, but I'm sure he would hate it. You will know when you are making and finding meaning. Like, trust yourself, you'll know. It's just, there isn't one way to do it. So I can't tell you that this is how you go out and find meaning in your life. All I can really say is to just keep trying things, and hopefully one day you'll find something that will help you keep going. As Peterson likes to emphasize, life can suck. Financial problems can pop up, health is never guaranteed, and we're all just one stupid mistake away from death. But life can be a right prick, so don't let it have its way. Fight against being limited by any of that. Be the absurd master of your days. Your fate belongs to you. Until next time.